Thanks, Alex, and it's a great pleasure to be here. And I'd particularly like to acknowledge the Minister and echo Alex's words thanking him for his great support for research, and in particular ICT research in Australia, which is the topic I was given to talk about. As an old fogey from the field, maybe it was thought I had some sort of deep overview, and I think I probably am about the oldest in the room who was a researcher in that area for a long time. What I'm doing is particularly aiming my talk for those who are not in Australia. It's a quick summary of what the field looks like here for those our international visitors, and for those in Australia who feel that I've slightly misemphasised things. I'm going to take off straight after the talk because I have a board meeting to go to, so you won't be able to throw brickbats at me. I will answer a couple of questions, however. Australian ICT research, particularly from a computer science point of view, has always been a little bit odd, in the sense that because of the incredible demand for graduates going back into the 70s, we had very, very big information technology departments in our universities, but people were very stretched producing graduates. It was very hard to get people to stay on to higher degrees, and research certainly got going, but often people had to go overseas to really get any high-impact research going. We only really started to offer PhDs in ICT through the 70s, and there were only a handful of them. You start to see the numbers come through as the 80s develop. And what happened, though we have some wonderful researchers in the core of ICT, you will see that as I go through that actually our strength is in the aura around ICT, and where we're very, very strong indeed. It's in the link between ICT and electrical engineering that our strengths really emerge very strongly. This is also a bit of a test of eyesight. I have a new assistant who helps with slides, who's 23 and assured me that the slides are easy to read. Well, they get harder. Anyway, looking at things like ERA, looking at surveys of our big agencies like NICTA and CSIRO and DSTO, you quickly come to the current ICT strengths tend to sit in AI, with particular strengths in machine learning, robotics and vision, which is, of course, is Alex's field. And there's quite a lot of strength. Sometimes you don't always realise how strong it is, because one thing, even though everyone in the community tends to know each other, we don't always collaborate with each other in Australia. Often we collaborate better with people overseas. So you get some, and I'll show a pattern of that at the end. I've put down information systems, which does cover a multitude of sins a bit, but that has translated to a lot of business work. So the research has moved into things like banking systems. Australian banking systems were very high impact very early, and if you looked around big Asian banks, they were largely built on Australian software, which reflected an early strength in that field. Many of you will have heard of the embedded systems work, particularly just pull your mobile phone out and you'll see the impact of Australian research there. And we're very strong, and going back a long way in wireless and network systems. And that is a long, deep strength of Australia, the wireless work, which to some extent we developed, then went somewhat quiet on. The people were still here doing good things, and then it was finally recognised it was good and has finally been celebrated, particularly with some of the wonderful patents that came through, and the Minister referred to the CSIRO patent. So that's the sort of core area where there's the strengths. If you look at the ICT-related strengths, you get some great strengths indeed. And Australia really punches very much above its weight in things like control systems, signal processing, quantum computing. And while you might say that's not very practical at the moment, we're moving very, very fast in that field and down the track. We've had a long history in photonics, and that too has translated into some great industrial work, both industrial research and actually industrial products and firms. There are some areas like geomatics where we mightn't be super strong in absolutely publishing terms, but we've had long-term research and it's been of high impact. And one well-known example, but it's by no means the only one around, is that Google Maps was developed here in Australia. and that builds on the geomatic strength of the country. Medical bionics is another area. A lot of people have heard of the cochlear implant, of the firm Cochlear, building on ICT research, joining with medical and signal processing research. And then we've always had great strengths around modelling, particularly in modelling going to the environment and leading to sort of management systems, the sort of information systems that sit on top of major information-dense models. So that's a quick look at the strengths. Now at the way it's organised. This is the eyesight challenge. There's one that gets better. So for Terry, right down the back, who had his eyes fixed up, he can put his hand up if he can read it later on. But unlike several other disciplines in Australia, the ICT sector looks quite different to, say, biological sciences or the physical sciences or history or something like that. Like most areas, the biggest in the scientific and engineering side, the biggest researchers by amount of dollars is the private sector, and then after that it's not ordered. The universities have, as I said, have had a long history in ICT, and that's all the universities, the group of 8, the older universities, the newer universities that were built on the Institutes of Technology have had very, very big ICT departments and keep them going to this day, and they're strong as well as the group of 8 ones. Within the universities, there are some of the special centres that are won competitively. For example, the Australian Research Council Centres of Excellence, which are the programs that are the successor programs to things like the special research centres and the key centres of teaching and research. And they're not just in ICT, but in those fields we've had some very, very good ICT centres, and I'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. Alex mentioned the cooperative research centres, and there probably haven't been as much as anyone wanted to be in ICT, and they tend to be in ICT related, but we do have some there, and there's always been great emphasis on getting cooperative research centres in this field. CSIRO, you're going to hear lots more about CSIRO's ICT through the day, and that's been very practical, but I won't talk there because I'll leave that to the many CSIRO people in the room. DSTO, our Defence Science and Technology Organisation, is very strong in ICT, with particular emphasis around the signal processing side, and has been very good on clever devices. And then we've been very lucky in Australia to have NICTA, National ICT Australia, which is a sort of a mixture of centre of excellence with extra funding from the Communications Department, and has been an attempt, a very successful attempt, to build research intensity into the ICT area, and it's definitely lifted the game. And again, you'll hear a lot about that, and the former CEO, David Skellen, is here, and there'll be talk about NICTA's work, and there's several other people from NICTA in the room. As well as that, there's a range of special initiatives that happen from state governments, and state governments have been very keen to support ICT. Just to promote New South Wales for a second, recently there was a new broadband initiative from the New South Wales Government, and that involves particularly NICTA and CSIRO as well as its universities. The private sector. Now just looking at the sort of fields and breaking up some of that information a little bit more. Looking at the Australian Bureau of Statistics areas, and this does gel with what you see in the publications to the extent the private sector can publish, where you tend to see the strengths in the private sector is the internet publishing, the telecommunications, very strong, internet service provision, web portals, multimedia, activities like that, library and information services, and then computer system design and related services, and that's where you get the cochlears and the medical bionics and so on. Having a quick look at those Australian Research Council Centres of Excellence, again, they tend to reflect that sort of area around ICT where Australia has great strengths. So we have the Autonomous Systems one, which is just drawing to a close, and the new CEO of NICTA, Hugh Darrant-White, was the CEO of that. We have one in control. As a matter of fact, there were 2 in control, one that I should have added in. So the Newcastle Centre of Excellence in Complex Dynamic Systems and Control, the Mathematical and Statistical Modelling one, the Quantum Computation one, and QDOS, the Ultra High Band Devices for Optical Systems, which reflects our big strengths in photonics, and then the Vision Science one at ANU. And you could argue one or two others are ICT related. But that's given that there's only a relatively small number of these centres in the country, ICT related activities form a strong subset of the total. In the CRCs, while there have been many over the time, at the moment the three that are ICT related are capital markets, a very innovative CRC in terms of analysing the stock market data going back almost 20 years in terms of every trade on a variety of stock markets from around the world, the Spatial Information CRC and the Smart Services CRC, and there's representatives from both of those here today, so again, there are people to ask. As well as that, as well as ICT research, the Ministers led a range of initiatives to get a lot of infrastructure that's not so much for ICT, but is ICT infrastructure serving research more generally. And that infrastructure has been particularly built by the ICT community. So you see leaders from the ICT community have led the innovative development of a lot of this infrastructure. The sort of core backbone of it has been the broadband system linking all the Australian universities and CSIRO, AARNet, and of course that links to the rest of the world, the classic education and research network. And then there's e-research systems, systems for data sensing of various sorts, systems for data collection, systems on access, big computation systems, big storage systems. And again, you could argue I've left a few off, and your eyesight will be pleased I did. That one we don't really need to talk about. The only reason that's there is just to tell you a little bit about the actual dollars, again, mainly for our colleagues from overseas. We spend in the private sector about $1 billion a year in ICT research. If you break, what's happening here? If you break that by state, I can just tell you the one right at the top is New South Wales. While New South Wales doesn't head the list in research on all things, it does have a remarkably dense amount of ICT research, and that reflects, I think, some of the long amount of research in things like CSIRO, more recently NICTA, the work in photonics that's been led pretty much around Sydney University, some of the big strengths around University of New South Wales, Macquarie and UTS. And a remarkable amount of the ICT research has popped up in various ways in the industry sector. And while I'm no fan of the linear model of research, of trying to explain research and industry connections, in the ICT area, it sort of in Australia often works. Government and higher ed, spending of the order each of about $250 million a year. Then if you look at the probably indicators in the universities of the sort of areas of strength, these are the Australian Research Council Discovery Grants in ICT and electrical engineering in recent years. And as you see a field, as you see a colour getting larger or smaller, that tells whether that field's moving in terms of numbers of grants in the area. So this is in projects, not in dollars, so don't scream somebody if you had billions of dollars somewhere and it's reflected in a relatively small colour. But the takeaway message there is, again, that electrical engineering is re-emerging, very strong, has always been fairly strong. The AI field is sitting there as that blue blob at the bottom, and as I said, tends to be fairly strong. Computation theory and maths is good, and again has been a field, despite the fact we don't, as I said, have a lot of core computer science, it has been a sort of running strength through the field. And there's the information systems, as I said, sitting there as the purple block. If you look at the linkage grants, the links with end users in the Australian Research Council system, not totally dissimilar pattern. The electrical engineers are doing a lot. The information systems and the AI people are pretty much running around in that space as well as in the communications technology more recently has been coming through. There's been several references to ERA. Your eyesight certainly won't take this. Even with my glasses I can't manage it. But it does reflect the comments around the room. All have been right. it's worth studying, and what we're not showing, we'll just get rid of it, oh, maybe there are some young eyes in the room, maybe I won't while I make a couple of comments. Listen to me, don't look at the thing. In a way, compared to other fields, the results on ICT are a bit disappointing. Part of it, you can argue, has to do with some of the ways we publish in this area, but you can only push that argument so far. I think there has to be a bit of a call to arms to look at our outputs in this field. It is true that the bulk of the universities got world standard or above, but unlike some of the fields in biological sciences and mining and some of the other areas, there weren't a lot of fives right at the very, very top. And it is interesting to see where the strengths, and again this picture shows what I was saying before, AI sort of systems, the strength in electrical engineering, of course, is quite strong over there, the 09 area, where you do see several fives. So that business, again, of arguing the area around core ICT is where the strengths sit. Just a quick final note on collaboration. Collaboration with the EU goes back a long way. And there's a couple of other old fossils like David Skellen in the room who, like me, were very involved in projects that led up to the Science and Technology Agreement of '94. Several of it, Senator Carr's predecessor department, when it was Senator John Button as the minister, put a lot of money into research, getting close to 20 years ago, for joint projects between EU projects of that time and R&D here. And several of us had quite large support, and we're very grateful to the Australian government for that support to work with European colleagues. And even though we definitely need more support, it's important to remember that support would not be just starting from scratch. A lot of Australian researchers have links in various ways and have put together projects of various kinds. Many have used the EU COST program very advantageously. The special research centres, key centres, NICTA, CSIRO and so on have been assiduous in funding a lot of visitors going both ways. There have been very strong links in the broadband area, in the networks work and in the infrastructure work. So the base is incredibly strong. It's just that it's dispersed. And I'm very pleased about the recent projects, and thank you to the EU for funding projects of mapping the thing, because I think we will start to see, we'll hear this through the, I won't hear it because I'll be away, but I'll be looking forward to reading the results, that I think it's very good to begin to understand how we can do a more formal mapping of the strengths, and that is always a good basis for good new policy and possibly new funding. Just a last point. About science and research publication partners of Australia. The Minister talked about the links. We have to be realistic that the biggest publication partner is, and this is not ICT, this is across the whole field, is the USA, then the UK, and then, of course, moving up is China. But, Ambassador, you'll be pleased to see the one after that is Germany, and there are then a range of European nations in there. Just wanted to mention the networks, but I think most people in the room know about the big research and education networks. And I just wanted to mention that another thing about publication. This is the publication, this is the New South Wales Smart Connect tool that looks at publication connections around the world. And this is for Ben Eggleton, the director of QDOS, the Photonics Centre of Excellence. And if you look at Ben's publication partners, what those links are showing is who he publishes with. That's not an atypical pattern for somebody in this field. And Alex, I think that's probably all. That's a gallop right across the field. Happy to answer questions, and very quickly before I disappear.
We have to have time for one or two questions only. So, questions. Yes, this one there.
Hi, I'm Wayne Goss from IBM. You mentioned cost. I've actually participated in a cost workshop in Europe, specifically focused on the socio-economic benefits of big science and how industry, governments and research can sort of work better together. My question is, do we have a similar kind of mechanism here in Australia to facilitate and therefore stimulate workshops or getting the right minds together to identify opportunities for collaboration or ICT research?
I probably should let the Minister answer that one. I didn't know if you want to say anything. Oh, sorry, did you want to say anything, Minister? Or? Yeah.
We do have a range of processes to encourage better understanding and networking. We also have investment guideline arrangements for investment attraction, which is the process we went through with IBM. Also CSL, is another project that we've done through the Department of Innovation. Now these are not particularly easy, particularly at a time of fiscal consolidation, as we term it these days, so that there'll be less of it. And I think you'll find around the world there'll be less of it. But the principal arrangements in regard to the clustering for industry associations, industry participants and the research community is through our research agencies and also through the Department of Innovation. And we're more than happy, if you think we could do more, to talk to you about how we can do that.
And then I'd like to give more of the informal answer, which is that I think in Australia a lot of these things have happened by people getting together. We're a small enough community. And I think this community particularly has been very good. And I think things, particularly like NICTA, have played a very good role in tending to cause such workshops to happen. So I think once someone starts them, they tend to get going. Okay.
Please now join me in thanking Professor Mary O'Kane for her presentation. Thank you.